Social Psychology, Module 13, Formation of Attitudes. Operant Conditioning Theory. Objectives. The main objectives in this lesson are to understand operant conditioning theory in relation to attitude formation, 2. Different principles of operant behavior, from which we will be understanding schedules of reinforcement, secondaries in reinforcement, successive approximation or shaping, superstitious behavior. Attitudes, like other responses, are acquired through various mechanisms of learning. A behavior that is followed by a reinforcing stimulus will tend to be repeated, that is, it will be learnt. Attitudes can be acquired in the same way. Consider the formation of attitudes about gender differences. For example, a child may develop an attitude towards action-oriented aggressive movies because they are exposed to the information that promotes conflict and because they are reinforced for expressing such attitudes. For example, if a child is greeted with smiles, receives applauses and nods every time that she or he says some dialogue from the movie, such statements will become more frequent. They will be adopted by the child because they have been instrumental in obtaining outcomes the child values. Operant behaviors, on the other hand, are those behaviors which are not caused by any specific stimuli of the environment. The stimuli of the operant behavior are difficult to identify. These behaviors are performed by the individual voluntarily. Skinner of that opinion, behaviors of human beings are predominantly operant in nature and can be tied to a readily identifiable stimulus. These responses seems to be spontaneous and voluntary. Another property of this kind of behavior is that its frequency of occurrence is changed according to the event that follows. More specifically, the strength of these responses increases when the response occurs and is followed by reinforcement. Operant behavior. Frederick Skinner proposed a formulation of behavior which arises out of observation of animal performance in a type of experiment that he invented. The bar pressing activity of a rat in a specially designed box called the Skinner box. Skinner believed that most of the complex behaviors could be examined through isolating a few highly repeatable phenomena in conditioning. It is this collection of concepts, principles, and distinctions along with a particular philosophy, science, and research. He explains that a piece of behavior is understood only when we have learned how to predict and control that behavior. Skinner's approach towards behavior was more to do with the respondent, where he proposed two classes of response and distinguished them as a class of elicited response and a class of emitted response. Responses which are elicited by known stimuli are named as respondents, and a response which is not correlated to any kind of known stimulus and not emitted is known as operant, as they are not elicited by recognized stimuli. Let us understand the types of conditioning, which is very important for us to understand attitudes. Types of conditioning. There are two types of responses are termed as two types of conditioning, type S and type R. When reinforcement is correlated with the stimuli, the conditioning behavior is type S conditioning, where the conditioning stimulus is presented with the unconditioned stimulus to elicit the response. This is well explained in the Pavlov's classical conditioning experiment, that is the SR theory, the stimulus and the response. Type R conditioning is believed to be more comprehensive as conditioning is in relation to the operant behavior, where the term R response is correlated to reinforcement, that is RR theory, which is called as response and reinforcement. The experiment he originally used was liver pressing. For a hungry organism, this response may be strengthened by following it with food. It is not the site of the liver which is important, it is the pressing of the liver. The conditioning response does not resemble the response to the reinforcing stimulus. It is the relationship to the reinforcing the stimulus is that the response causes the reinforce to reappear. In the operant conditioning, let us understand the process of reinforcement through the types of reinforcers. A reinforcer is defined by its effects. Any stimulus is a reinforcer if it increases the probability of a response. The stimuli that happen to act as reinforcers falls into two classes: positive reinforcer, negative reinforcer. Positive reinforcer is a stimulus which, when applied following an operant response, strengthens the probability of the response. For example, food, water, sexual contact classify as positive reinforcers for appropriately deprived individuals. Negative reinforcer. Negative reinforcer is a stimulus which, when removed following an operant response, strengthens the probability of that response. A loud noise, a very bright light, extreme heat or cold, electric shock classifies as negative reinforcers. They are also called aversive stimuli, which means a negative stimuli or an aversive stimuli is one of which the organism will learn something to escape. The pushing of aversive stimuli converts the proprioceptive feedback from the punished response into conditioned aversive stimuli, so that when the response begins to occur later, the feedback from the early moments are aversive and therefore the response is interrupted and possibilities of the target behavior is likely to reduce in future. For example, a child will do anything if they desire to get anything from their parents. The child starts nagging them, and if the behavior is ignored by the parents, they would shout, yell, or even start crying. Thus, this behavior of the child might embarrass the parent and would compel to do what the child desires for. Types of punishment. Positive punishment. Presenting an unpleasant behavior after a response, applying an unpleasant event after a behavior. Spanking, for example, is a common example of positive punishment. This type of punishment is often referred to as punishment by application, a negative consequence to directly applied to reduce the unwanted behavior when an unpleasant behavior is observed. Negative punishment. Negative punishment involves taking away something pleasant after a behavior occurs. For example, if children fail in exams, parents don't allow children to play outside and allow them to meet their friends. To increase the desirable behavior, they would introduce negative punishment on the previous behavior. Types of reinforcement and punishment through a diagram. Reinforcement, punishment, which involves positive and negative. Positive reinforcement is applied with a stimulus and negative reinforcement is applied to remove a particular stimulus. So, we tend to see that there is a positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement will always increase the frequency of desirable behavior, whereas in punishment it decreases the frequency of undesirable behavior. This will help a person to form attitudes and to continue a particular behavior or to reduce a particular behavior. Now, the next topic would be on schedules of reinforcement, how reinforcement plays an important role. In his experiment with rats, Skinner was interested in the number of times the reinforcement is presented and scheduled for the desired behavior, which is not likely the same with the response with ordinary life with most of the individual's behavior, as it is not regular or uniformed. For example, a farmer does not always receive a harvest from his planting, yet they continue to plant. This behavior of the farmer clearly indicates that a strong reinforcing factors, both internal and external, play an important role in the strengthening behavior. To maintain or strengthen a response, Skinner has introduced intermittent reinforcement, which are of two types: interval schedules and ratio schedules. A no intermittent reinforcement is introduced to see initially if a response is strengthened or weakened if reinforcement is not given. When continuous reinforcement is given to the subject for a desired behavior is called continuous reinforcement. Extinction when no response is reinforced are known as non-intermittent reinforcement. For example, every response of a child is appreciated or unappreciated by the teacher depending upon the likability towards the behavior. When a particular behavior is ignored and is not reinforced by any kind, or reinforcement can result into extinction. Response rate is low or relaxed. Extinction rate is fast or reckless. Intermittent reinforcement is of two types: interval schedules and ratio schedules. Interval schedules, fixed interval schedule. Reinforcement is provided for the first response to occur after the gap of a selected interval of time, which is fixed, measured from the earlier reinforcement from the response. A range of 30 seconds to 10 minutes time or an interval is fixed here to receive reinforcement. For example, a child would receive a reward or punishment for the correct or wrong response after the fixed period of time. For example, smile or a slap, good or bad. The response and extinction rate is average here. Variable interval schedule. Variable interval schedule is introduced in which a range of intervals from very short to very long amount of time is used to learn a behavior in a random variable order. The tendency to respond with this schedule can extinct as subject might not correlate between response and reward. For example, a child would get promoted only if he or she passes the final examination and would be detained if he or she does not pass the exam. The student strongly believes and develops the attitude that final exam is more important than the periodic test, that is assigned, and would slow down in their learning attitude through the year and build up high pressure at the year end. Here, the response rate is slow or relaxed and extinction rate is high. The second is the ratio schedules, fixed ratio schedule. In this schedule, a number of responses are fixed to give reinforcement, or reinforcement is provided for nth response after the preceding. For example, in a classroom, a child is given a reinforcement, which is reward or punishment, only after third or sixth presentation. Here, number of presentations are fixed to receive the reinforcement. which creates response rate to be fast and extinction rate is to be average. Variable ratio schedule. In this schedule, the ratio varies randomly from small to large as the chance of reinforcement for any response is approximately constant independent of the count. A uniform rate of responding ensues. For example, a child would receive a reward any time for behaving well with teachers, staff and other students in school premises. So, to receive the rewards, the child continues to showcase good behavior. Gambling also can be one of the good examples as it increases the tendency to play in expectation to win one last time to retrieve all that they have lost. Winning achievement. The response rate is fast and extinction rate is slow as change factor drives the individual to form an attitude towards a particular behavior. In schedules of reinforcement, we have a chart which we call it as a flow chart. Schedules of reinforcement are of three types. One is extinction, intermittent and continuous. Intermittent reinforcement, we tend to have interval as well as ratio. That means the fixed as well as variable. In ratio also we have fixed as well as variable. So, these are the things which will continue to make a particular behavioral change in the individual. The secondary reinforcement. When reinforcement is directly rewarded to reduce a drive is called as primary reinforcement, and when reinforcement do not reduce a drive directly are called as secondary reinforcement. Secondary reinforcers are extremely potent in the control of human learning. For example, pocket money, gestures and small words like a smile, a pat on the back, good girl, boy, the statement correct or grades A+ are all positive reinforcers when used appropriately. For example, to increase the purchase of the retail market of their product introduces token economy, saying that the number of times you purchase you would receive some points and these pointies can be redeemed at the next purchase. Thus, secondary reinforcement will increase the response towards adding the tokens, points for the next purchase every time. Thus, attitude towards buying increases to that retail than the other retails. Successive approximation or shaping. Shaping is the process to reinforce a behavior closer for successive behavior. Reinforcement of a response which successively approximate desired performance is worthy of special attention because through it the experimenter can shape the individual's behavior to reduce an undesirable attitudes towards movies in a child. A motherly first rewards the child for watching only children-oriented movies, and when once that is achieved, she would apply reward for completely avoiding movies, slowly and firmly to replace it with a desirable behavior. Superstitious. Superstitious is a general feeling or belief in supernatural forces forming an attitude to bring fortune, misfortune in someone's life. A desire that can influence unpredictable factors and a need to resolve uncertainty. An attitude formed by believing experiences which drives superstitions and explains as why they are irrational and lack scientific wisdom. Through operant conditioning, it is observed that there is no underlying relationship between the response and reinforcement because the behavior elicited can be purely ensued by probability factor. When an individual behaves in a certain manner, nowhere in relation to the behavior and think that he or she was rewarded for the same would be and explains rationally. According to Skinner, superstitious beliefs are the results of this conditioning. For example, if a black cat confronts your way while stepping out of your home. The person might not go out for the work and would relate his misfortune with the incident. Few communities practices some primitive rituals and behave irrationally. Rituals like spotting ground level water for constructing a well in a dry, deaded land. When such strong attitudes are formed and are practiced, they tend to become superstitious. It can also result in heinous acts like, for example, sacrificing a child or an adolescent to god or demon on the solar or lunar eclipse, will reward them with great fortune and well-being. The phrase touch wood is used by many youngsters from Western countries have formed an attitude to help or promote positive mental attitude and good fortune rather than sound decision making. Let us understand through summary. Learning, as discussed earlier, which plays a key role in attitude formation. As a result, we clearly understand its importance in observing, generalizing, discriminating and abstracting a concept, yet the personal constructs of an individual will always not help them in accept everything and thus have their limitation in forming their perceptual attitudes. This frequent exposure to the events forced consciously or unconsciously through rewarding them makes it very instrumental in treating individuals or objects as a learned behavior from their past experiences in a particular fashion. Conditionality is a central principle of learning. A reward or punishment is contingent on the behavior of the individual. It is a common feature of our social and economic lives and is integral to everyday notions of responsibility that people's actions involve consequences. Parents, teachers and other stimuli tend to think of conditionality in terms of attitudes attached to benefits or the uses of services provided for their benefits.